Yeah, if the luck is bad, it doesn't work.
Okay, Kevin,
Okay.
I
So want me to
will
start?
start off with
Okay.
you.
Okay. So short idea. So um, in the upcoming parashiyot, it talks about Joseph getting sold by his brothers and landing up in Egypt in Potiphar's house, and then getting imprisoned, and again getting freed and being appointed to be viceroy. And while he was in prison, he interpreted the dreams of the wine steward and the baker, and they were 100% accurate. And he asked the wine steward to remember him, and the wine steward conveniently forgot who he was. And I was reading in the commentaries of the Chumash. It says someone at such a high level shouldn't have relied on human intervention, knowing that he knew that Hashem is involved in everything, and why, and he was censured for that and given or punished, given an extra 2 years in the prison cell. But he knew that. So this is a question. He's asked why, if he knew that, did he still try asks for human intervention? And it could be maybe as part of hishtadlut, even though maybe he thought it could have sped up his freedom from the prison. But he apparently he shouldn't have done that. I mean, for us on our level, we can't. We're not on that in that league. But he shouldn't have done that. But he knew he shouldn't have done that, but he did it anyway.
So for me,
That's
it
just
doesn't
the thought.
make sense. I tell you why, because I always thought that you shouldn't rely on Hashem. You should do everything you possibly can to try and make it work. And if it fails, then obviously you rely on Hashem. So I would think you put the Ishtatlut in, and it makes sense to actually. And I've heard the same thing that you're saying, but I'm just saying from I'm a simple guy, so from my perspective, I don't quite get it.
Yeah.
But I'm at that level, very basic level.
Kevin,
So
I
so
agree
are
with
we.
you, and not just agree with you, but I think when you look at Yaakov when he went to meet Esav, he didn't just rely on Hashem. He prayed
Mm.
and he prepared for war. You must do everything, not just only rely on Hashem. We learn this from Yaakov. So I'm not sure. I know the classic what Kevin says the classic commentary, but I also just disagree with it. I think you should do your part as well, not just
And he
rely on
even
miracles.
placated his brother with gifts. Lance is right. He placated Esau
Yeah,
gifts and spoke to him very gently and said, spoke up to him as if he was a high authority. You're right. So it's difficult to understand, but um, yeah. Just one thing before I quickly get started, Kev, is that on the first night of Hanukkah, for the last few years since we've been giving the share, it's my mom's yahrzeit, first night and first day. So I generally give Lance a share for the guys, and yeah, please attend because it's
What day is it? Just tell us what time and what day,
well, it's first night Hanukkah. We've always had it on
which
first.
it's
is
the
what day?
25th.
In terms of
The
exact,
night of the 25th,
yeah.
which is what day?
Let me
Let's
just look in
check.
the calendar.
25th is a Wednesday night. So first day Hanukkah is Thursday, 26th.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a Wednesday. Yeah, I should. Yeah. Okay. No, no, of course.
Well, if you want
It's,
to do it on the
it's,
Thursday, it's fine, but I think we generally do in the evening to free up the days for everybody. All right, let's get started. Lance asked a very good question. He's Lance, do you want to phrase it in your own words?
Um, just in terms of whether it's
I can phrase it for you in the context of what we did. So what Lance asked, which was a very good question, is we learned this concept that once you give testimony, that testimony cannot be retracted. Am I saying it about right, Lance? And what bothered you about that? How do we know? Because the Gemara said, well, how can you incriminate yourself by saying that you lied? Because we learn that testimony, once it's been completed, he cannot alter his testimony in any way. So therefore, the new admittance is inadmissible by court, in court. And therefore, the testimony can't be accepted as admission that he lied. Okay. So Lance's issue is okay, but maybe him admitting that he lied would get somebody off a death penalty in a more serious case. And the first thing that I brought up is the case regarding Rav Yehuda on Rav. And Rav on Rav is talking purely in our case of a Gemara in monetary cases for this specifically. I mean, it does deal with Makkos, with obviously corporal punishment, but our particular case, on the opinion of Rav, of those two different opinions, were monetary in nature. But Lance's question, although it couldn't be addressed then because it's out of context of the Gemara at hand, we generally don't go off on a tangent when it's off the topic, had to be addressed. So I spoke to Rabbi Goldschmidt about it on Friday night. Lance, have I communicated it accurately? You can add a tweak if you want to.
Yes. I'd actually ask more about if it's only for death sentence or is it also applicable. I thought your answer was that it's only for money matters, but for death sentence is different.
Okay, so on that point, good point, is that what I said is that we're dealing with it in this context of monetary matters. So if in the courts of Sanhedrin there would be other factors that come to light, I said we'd have to just look at it in more detail. But for sure, as far as monetary cases were concerned, I said the other day, it's obvious here if the Gemara says it, then retraction of testimony is not possible. Because even in Bava Kama, when we dealt with actions of damages or creditors and debtors, it was financial in nature as well. And we did go through it in Sanhedrin, but I wanted to go through it to see that in such a case with weighty outcomes, it would be an exception as opposed to the rule followed here. Does that make sense? When I brought it up the other day, Lance?
Yes.
Okay, because I said in the context of where we're speaking, for sure it's self-evident it's monetary. In terms of death, I said there might be extenuating. So I spoke to Rabbi Goldschmidt, and he said, look, there is a general principle, a couple of principles that are coming into play here. The first thing is that you must remember is a shavua, an oath is taken. Just hang on, guys. I just want to put this on pause a sec. Just give me 1 second. Gosh, just hang. So one of the things that Rabbi Goldschmidt said is that we don't understand what a shavua means, using Hashem's name before you take an oath of testimony. People have no concept of it. And I watched a movie last night called The Judge with Robert Downey Jr. and Robert Duvall. And that in many of these Bible Belt places, they take it very seriously, put your hand on the Bible. I mean, I think they do it now as a tradition, but a shavua that's obviously permeated its way into secular law has its origins in Torah law that you use a shavua with Hashem's name. And therefore, somebody would have to be crazy to take an oath with Hashem's name if you had any sort of fear of Hashem. And that was the one factor. The other factor Rabbi Goldschmidt mentioned is that Jews are generally, especially in those days, believed if you're prepared to use Hashem's name, unless your track record is dubious. However, when you come later and you change your testimony, now we don't know what to believe. Do we believe you when you said it the first time, or do we believe you when you said it the second time? Because now if you said you wish to admit you lied, then how do we know you weren't lying in the first place? What makes us believe you lying the second time and not the first? How do we know? Therefore, it puts doubt on everything. And when there are two cases of doubt, we generally go forth for what you've put as your first testimony when we do a shavua, because we don't want you to do a shavua a second time around, because then it's just using Hashem's name in vain. And number two, we don't know if we can believe you. He said it's like the voting process. Everybody has a chance to vote, and when you realize your party doesn't keep its promises, you can't retract your vote. So it's a one-time it's a one-time statement to the court that doesn't get retracted.
It also, Damon, if I can add something, it also acts as a deterrent and a precedent. So otherwise people would know that if they can recant something, then they can lie, recant, and that the second one will be admitted and accepted. So this deters people from lying first time round. Well, hopefully.
I think you're right. I think there is a deterrent. The other thing the Gemara is worried about is coercion. That you go and testify against somebody's guilt, and he sends two friends round to beat you unless you retract your testimony. Once you've made it, there's very little anybody can do about it. So that's another factor that's taken into account. But the bottom line of it is the minute you prove yourself to be a liar, how do we know you're telling the truth in the first place? And then you have to take another shavua and use Hashem's name in vain. There's no retraction of testimony. One other point is in terms of death penalty cases, if you say that you lied, even if your testimony can't be retracted, if you provide evidence, then you're not actually providing evidence with your testimony. The evidence will speak for itself. But that's in any case when testimony is not corroborated by the evidence. Then the testimony is thrown out if you've got more substantial evidence. And Lance did learn a case, and we learned this in Sanhedrin, Gavin, where somebody did die with Adam Zomimim, and they knew that they were testified falsely against, and they accepted the punishment. Do you remember that? And they said the judges will be judged harshly. Not the judges, Lance, it was actually the Adam Zomimim that were part of the procedure itself. They were judged. The judges have to carry out has to be carried out according to the law. So I don't want to divert too much, but Lance, also you must know that when we learned the process of Sanhedrin, it's a very, very tricky process to get your testimony accepted in the first place. They ask questions that very few people can pass unless they've got a photographic memory. The problem that we had in Sanhedrin is not that an innocent person would be sent to death for being guilty. It's that a guilty one would be off the hook as if he was innocent, because you had issues like Groma, which is indirect murder, like tying somebody to a pier and waiting for the tide to come in, or putting somebody in a cave and making sure they ran out of food and water, or the witnesses themselves didn't give Hazroah warning as to what would happen, that it's a death penalty offense, and did they need to say what death penalty offense it was. So the case was more not that an innocent person would be convicted, but that a guilty person could get off on a technicality. And that's why if it killed somebody within their generation, it was known as a bloody Sanhedrin, because they had blood on their hands. Do you see what I'm saying? Let's just wait. Arthur's with us. Don't know where he disappeared to. Just hang on. We're going to quickly go through this quickly. Arthur, where did we lose you?
10 minutes ago because you didn't let me in. I had to disconnect to recharge my bus card.
All right, so just bottom line, Arthur, is that your testimony can't be retracted, because if the second time you said you the first time, we don't know if you're telling the truth the second time. It also avoids coercion, because the first time if you say somebody's guilty and you and then the second time suddenly they're innocent, maybe two of their mates have come knocking on your door and said they'll pulverize you, so it eliminates coercion. First thing of it is you use the Shavua with Hashem's name. So any Jew is believed unless proven otherwise. The minute they said they lied, they're no longer believed. So retraction of testimony is a waste of time, because how do we know we're telling the truth a second time if they weren't afraid of using Hashem's name in vain the first time? So it's not true. Bottom line.
Yeah.
And it's like a vote. Rabbi Schmidt said it's like a vote. You only cast your vote once, and that's it. The party that's elected is elected. It works like a vote. All right, guys, let me just go through this very, very quickly so that we can get it done here. But we are going to start another daf. So just to know that, as you know, it says, Rabbi Akiva says that on your own confession, if you say you were conspiring or plotting witness, you don't have to pay the reciprocal penalty. That's obviously before the second set of witnesses come. And based on what? Based on the fact that he considers it a kanas, a fine, a penalty. Okay? Then Rabbi said, yeah, you can recognize that this is the case because they haven't actually done anything and yet they are executed and they pay the reciprocal penalty. So what he's actually saying is that these Adim Zomim sought to have an innocent person given the death penalty by saying he slept with a Bas Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen, and she was going to get the death penalty. They were caught up by a second set of witnesses, and therefore nothing bad had happened to these innocent defendants. And yet the Adim Zomim are given the death penalty. Okay? And therefore it's proving of strangulation that if the penalty you get does not match the penalty that was given to the victim, that's a fine. It's not a mammon. It's not compensation. We went through that, and the rabbis are saying, listen, it doesn't work like that. That even though it would seem to be the case, is that what you intended to do in the verdict is done to you, and therefore it is compensation for the verdict. But Rabbi Akiva is saying, based on intention, you did intend to have the victim killed, according to Rabbi, and Rav Nachman said you did intend the victim to pay the money, but whether you're dealing with a death penalty case or a monetary case, when the second set of witnesses come, it's done to the Adim Zomim, even though it actually hasn't cost the defendant their life or any sum of money. So they're in agreement. Okay, so then there's a statement that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, and it said that a Zomim witness pays according to his share. So what did we say we mean by that? Is if you look in the fifth daf, that if you, two Adim Zomimim sought to cost the defendant 200 zuz, and then a second set of witnesses came and said that of Shimon and Ruvain, that Shimon was with them in a different location, but Ruvain they don't know anything about, then Shimon would have to pay his share of the 100 zuz because they would split the penalty at which they wanted to cost to the defendant. Now the Brisa said that that's untenable because we learn that at the end of the day you can't make somebody divide the penalty unless both Adim Zomimim are convicted. By the way, with regards to lashes, if they intended to cost this person 39 lashes, 40 minus 1, then each of those Adim Zomimim get lashed the full extent. They don't share it like the monetary obligation. Now, Rav has said, according to Rav, after having read that Brisa, that it's a case of a person that admits that he testified falsely. And he said, look, I was somewhere else at the time. I couldn't have saw what I saw. And the Gemara says, well, there seems to be a bit of a problem with that because once a witness has testified and his testimony was completed the first time, he can't alter his testimony, and anything that he says to change that testimony is inadmissible at court. So how can the court accept his admission that he lied? Therefore, the Gemara is going to rephrase Rava's explanation, and he says, look, it must be talking about when Rava comes before a court and says, this person says, myself, and another person testified, And actually, we were found to be Zomamim in another court. So, and we left before that could give us the reciprocal financial penalty we wish to cost the other party. We managed to escape. So, by admitting that he's been found to be a Zomem in another court, he actually is admitting that he owes a Hazama penalty. So, it's not actually a retraction of testimony, but it's an admittance that there's liability, and he was caught to be a Adam Zomamim, but he wasn't actually obligated to pay because he escaped from the court before this took place, and he now feels guilty in going to a different court and said this is what took place. But then there's an obvious problem. And what's that problem? Is according to Rabbi Akiva. Because if Rabbi Akiva is saying that by your own admission you don't pay the Hazama, why? Because he considered it a penalty. Why does he consider it a penalty? Because what you wanted to inflict on the victim was not inflicted on the victim when a second set of witnesses, you weren't there, and therefore you punished with that, but the other party, the defendant, actually wasn't punished. In other words, the verdict was given, but it wasn't carried out. So you're paying far more than that person actually paid, which is why Rabbi Akiva calls it a penalty. Because we said a penalty basically also has a problem, because if you don't have to pay it by your own admittance. Gavin, why don't you pay it by your own admittance?
Can't incriminate yourself.
Well, you can pay a compensation by your own admittance, and that's incriminating yourself. Be more specific.
Just ask the question. Sorry, I'm really tired. Just ask the question again.
Why would you not pay a kanas, a penalty, a fine, by your own admittance?
Because it's not something that what you're admitting to, you can't admit to a fine. A fine has to be leveled against you.
Excellent. Correct answer. So in Exodus chapter 22, verse 8, it was talking about the double payment, as you know, for a theft. And it said the careful payment. So him whom the judges will find guilty shall pay twofold to his fellow. And therefore we say, look, obviously, if he pays twofold, the one is compensation, that first 100%, and that second 100% is the knas, the penalty. And we learned that in Bava Kama 64b. And therefore, if you don't bother the court and the judge doesn't actually issue a proclamation against you, you don't have to pay. So therefore, when you come to the court and admit it of your own volition, you only have to compensate the person of what you stole without the penalty factor correct. So we're saying this doesn't work well with Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because if you admit that you basically lied and you made to pay, then Rabbi Akiva says you don't pay. So this explanation doesn't seem Rav's explanation of Rav to work at all with Rabbi Akiva. And yet it does, because if you look at it more carefully, this is exactly precisely the case. He's not paying on the basis of his own confession, guys. Okay? Judges had already come to him in another court and said, you're guilty. So he's going to a second court and said, we escaped before we were convicted. In other words, we were convicted of being aiding before we had to pay. And therefore, you've already troubled the court, Gavin. That's why it's not a contradiction to Rabbi Akiva. Because when you first look at it, you say, but why should you pay a penalty if you admitted to have lying? Rabbi Akiva says you don't. But the only way that this could work tenably, both with the brisa, where you don't have a second set of witnesses, because otherwise, why can't a second set of witnesses work? Simple. The brisa said, if you and another party owe the reciprocal penalty, then you don't have to pay your share if the Adim Zomamim, or if only one of you is convicted. Do you get what I'm saying? You both have to be convicted. So you wouldn't have to pay in that particular case. Rav Yehuda is saying Eidim Zomamim came, only one was convicted of being an Eid Zomamim by second set of witness, you'd have to pay. Rav and Rav said you don't, because both would have to be found guilty. So then Rava basically says that you're confessing on your own. You're confessing on your own and say, listen, I lied. And then the question is, well, you can't retract your testimony, so it's not accepted that you're lying and you'd have to pay on that basis. Because in your own testimony, you said that this person did commit the crime, and therefore your new confession is ignored. Then it's saying, well, then we have to talk about a case where one of the parties went to a separate court and said, I feel terrible. I was convicted with somebody else in a court of being a conspiring witness, and I'm here to pay my share. And then Rabbi Akiva would say, well, you don't have to pay your share because it's a fine. You're admitting to it. So it would seem to contradict Rabbi Akiva. But it doesn't contradict Rabbi Akiva because the only reason you're not admitting to something that you weren't convicted of. The other court already convicted you of it. You just escaped before you paid it. And now you're feeling guilty. And therefore you did trouble the judges. So therefore it becomes a fine then becomes any other monetary obligation. In other words, once the court has issued a ruling requiring a person to pay a fine, it becomes like any other monetary obligation, like any other debt. So his admission that he still owes isn't creating an obligation by his admittance. He's just confirming that one already exists. And therefore, it's not subject to the rationale by Rabbi Akiva that a person is exempt from paying a fine by his own admission because the court has already been troubled. Are you guys with me so far? It's not that complicated. Guys?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I'm just getting rid of this cat. Come and shoo. So here a person comes before a court and says, well, we and another person testified, we were found to be Zomamim in such and such a court, and we were held liable. So now he not only admits that he was found to be a conspiring witness, but his accomplice was. And they were sued and they were sentenced to pay the Hazama penalty, but he never paid it. So it's a collectible debt and not merely a fine. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva's case doesn't count in that fact. Now, so we're saying, okay, so then why go through this entire thing? Surely everything here so far has been obvious, okay? So the question is, well, what do we learn from this? It's obvious he must pay. So Rav is teaching that he must pay his share of the total Hazama penalty. So you're saying, okay, it's obvious. But the reason why you need Rav's teaching is you might have thought to say, look, you can't obligate his accomplice to pay by his admission. Meaning, a person's admission of a monetary obligation is treated by the courts as the equivalent of the testimony of 100 witnesses. That's how it's known. Because you're admitting to yourself. It's as if 100 witnesses are testifying against you because you're not convicting anybody else. And it's sufficient evidence for them to require him to pay. So you might say, well, it's a problem because an admission is accepted as conclusive evidence only in respect to the person making it. So you're saying, okay, so then this admission isn't effective as a general statement of testimony because the testimony of a single witness is insufficient to establish that someone owes somebody else money. Otherwise, you go to court and you say, well, he owes me money. And he turns around and says, well, I don't owe you money. So he also has been convicted of perjury. So in regard to his own liability, a person is always believed. So your thought of it is you might say that if you can't obligate your accomplice to pay by admission, then maybe you yourself do not become obligated. Why? Because we learned in the Brisa that Zomamim witnesses don't become liable until the guilt of both has been established. So Rav is saying that one making the admission is obligated to pay his share of the penalty. Why? Because the rule that Zomamim witnesses don't become liable until both have been found to be Zomamim isn't applicable here. Because the liability has already been established in another court, which sentenced them to pay. So his admission in this course is only an admission that he owes an unpaid debt. Okay, so what we are saying is, if you have a look on Rav Yehud, Rabbi Yehuda on Rav. The first statement is, if you remember, second set of witnesses, and only said we know that Ruvain was with us at the time in another place. So he's a conspiring witness. We don't know about the other guy. And it was at that point where we said that he can't pay his share. In a case where they're both Adams or Mimim, they split the bill of what they sought to cost the defendant. If it's lashes, they both get lashed to what each of them gets lashed, what they sought to do to the other party, they don't share it. But if only one of them is convicted of being a plotting witness, he doesn't pay unless both of them are convicted. So Rav turns around and says, well, what about a person that admits it to himself? You can admit that you pay any amount of money. If you want to give your money to tzedakah, you can. And the Gemara is saying, well, it's not that simple. You would have to both be convicted by another court, almost escape that court, and the other person can't be found. And by your own admittance, the reason why you pay in this case is it's not according to Rabbi Akiva that it's almost an admission without troubling the court. You were convicted, as Gavin said. And also you pay, and you might think you wouldn't have to pay. But the whole chidush here of Rava is that the reason that you pay is you're admitting to an already accountable debt. You're not triggering a conviction of another party. Any questions, guys? We're done with this. We're going to a new Mishnah. Yeah?
I want to ask something, just
Okay.
in terms of the Zomamim, maybe you've covered it, maybe you haven't, because if they level a false accusation against someone, which is considered what's that word? Not Lashon, like it falls under the laws of Lashon Hara. Is there like a penalty for that as well, a separate penalty that they're liable for, besides a monetary penalty, besides being given sentenced or given the punishment that they were wanted to be imposed on the person that was falsely accused? Could there be a separate penalty, financial penalty imposed because of slander?
So, okay, Kevin's asking a separate question. So when it comes to court matters, if you're speaking negatively about somebody, would there be because it's true, Lashon Hara is true, but it's something negative, would you have to pay a penalty? No. The only sort of penalty that would be obligatable would be, and you shall not bear false witness if you're lying, which is the 9th commandment. And that's what Ulla brings, is one of the sources that even though you shall not bring false testimony, which is one of the 9th commandment, and do we give lashes for a non-action? But when you bring it with the pasuk in chapter 19, verse 19, the two of them combined allow for lashes as part of a hazama, and the other aspect is for the testifying falsely. But there's no punishment as if it's Lashon Hara, because again, the punishment for Lashon Hara is if you transgress a negative commandment, but its wording, you generally don't get lashed. You don't get lashes. There are spiritual implications, but the court can't mete out lashes. In terms of kabbonos, etc., this is part of a court process to establish justice. It's not to speak negatively about somebody in order to damage somebody's perception. It's part of truthful evidence.
When the Zomamim accused the
No.
lady
That's a different sin. That's about testifying falsely. And that was an issue Ulla brought up and saying, look, how do we know we give lashes for this? How do we know that in fact is the penalty? We could make it monetary. How do we know when we can't apply the reciprocal penalty, lashes is the default position? And that was the whole issue with Ulla using a pasuk, and when they found the innocent ones guilty, they are lashed. And we were talking about a case there of Adam Zomamim, according to Ulla. Yeah, Lance?
Quick one. This one, what Kevin's saying is that Zomim can't be considered like Lashon Hara, because Lashon Hara, they're actually speaking the truth. It's negative, but it's the truth, whereas Zomim are
Correct.
actually blatantly lying.
Exactly, exactly. In other words, the testifying falsely is what's it called? Rechilus, when you're lying.
Yeah,
Yes.
Rachilus, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's different to telling the truth with Lashon Hara.
And affecting the reputation.
Correct, but there will be spiritual implications of all of this. But in terms of the based in meeting out for a non-action for verbal, that they generally don't do. But, however, there are court cases where you get monetary compensation for defamation. Remember, you accuse a woman on a wedding night of not being a virgin.
Yeah.
She's a naira. There are defamation cases that you have. But that's, as Lance said, for testifying falsely. That's not for telling the truth. Guys, we'll see you on Tuesday. I'm looking forward to a new Mishnah. I hope you have a stunning, stunning day ahead. Cheers, guys.
Afternoon. Cheers. You too.